how's it going? We did this activity, Where Do I Stand? And we learned a lot of new vocab, right? Outliers, interquartile range. We finally found a way to define them, even though we've used them in other classes. And we learned how to make box plots. Some of us already knew. Others of us are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So step one, we learned today, we make a dot at the max and the min, right? So those are the max and the min. We make a dot at quarter 1 and quarter 3. Right? And we draw a straight line at our median. So I'm noticing already that these two sets of data, and we can abbreviate. I'll call that one UM and this MSU. Just like we have UF and FSU, right? We can abbreviate those. We have to compare, and I notice already that the medians are the same. So it says, Mr. Wilcox is a huge fan of University of Michigan. His favorite season was the 90-97 perfect season. Here are back-to-back stem plots of that season of their arch rival. Write a few sentences comparing the distribution. Okay, so as I mentioned in class, the rubric, meaning if you miss any of these, you miss points, is that I have to talk about something that starts with an S, something that starts with an O, something that starts with a C and a V, and I have to use context. If this is about football scores, I got to talk about football scores, and I have to use comparative language, or I will get counted off. Okay, so this is my rubric. So I'm going to write my perfect model FRQ, and then I'm going to double check that I got all my points, right? So we start out answering the question at hand. It says, write a few sentences comparing the distributions. So I'm going to start out the sentence saying, the distribution of, and it's like, what is this? Well, it's of points scored. And it's points scored by, so I'll talk about this one first, right? Points scored by UM is roughly symmetrical. I can't totally tell the shape, but it looks like if I folded this side, it would roughly fold on top of the other. Roughly symmetrical. While, so I'm going to compare it to MSU, while MSU is, and we look at this and we say this one's quite a bit shorter and this one's quite a bit longer. So that would mean this data is skewed right. But not a ton, so I'm going to use slightly skewed right. I have completed the shape, okay? I've also completed the context, right? I talked about points scored and the two teams, so I don't have to keep going on and on and on about points scored. Pretty much got my context covered. Now, our centers, we're noticing our centers are the same. So let's say the centers of both UM and MSU are the same, with medians of, it looks like both of the medians are 25. Now, because one of them skewed, median is the better measure of center. So that's why we're using a box plot, and that's why we're comparing medians, right? Now we're looking at, so we have center. We did that. We're definitely comparing. Each time we're comparing, we got to be sure to do that. Now let's say I don't see any outliers. I don't have a way of seeing outliers here. It doesn't look like any whiskers are way far to the left or way far to the right. So let's go ahead and talk about variability. We notice that this is a much bigger range as this. We also know that IQR is the width of the box. We know the width of their boxes are very different as well. So I could use either one to compare, okay? So I could say, and should say, that MSU, this one, MSU has a much greater variability than the other one, UM, with and I can see their width of their box, an IQR of about, so what is the width of this box here? This looks about, I don't know, 18, and that's 40, so here, and here, this looks about 22 and 32. So that's a big difference. With an IQR of about 22 points, as opposed to UM with an IQR of 10 points. It doesn't look like, so I did variability. I could have gotten all my points if I did range, but I think everybody wouldn't have needed help with range. So I went ahead and did the harder one. All right, last one, I'm going to talk about outliers. It doesn't look like either one have outliers. Neither have any outliers. All right, that's the perfect question. You could get all your points if they gave you this as your FRQ question on the exam. This is one of the very first ones we'll go over. Okay, so what are some, and again, you don't have to take these extra notes unless you're struggling or you did poorly on the test and you're like, yeah, I need to revisit this idea, right? We have three important learning targets on this. The first learning target is, we dug a lot deeper with outliers today, right? We learned this 1.5 IQR rule and how to calculate it. And this is something you have to remember. You have to memorize it. So a low outlier would be any number that's smaller than √1 minus 1.5 multiplied by IQR. And we calculated today that a high outlier would be any number higher than √3 added to 1.5 IQR. That's way too high and that's way too low. Now our second learning target, we definitely learned something about box plots. Many have made one for the first time. They may have never made one before today. Notice it has 5 dots. That's also why we call it a 5-number summary, right? The 5 numbers stand for the minimum, √1, the median, √3, and the max. We give a dot for each. Okay, so let's say that's my min. I'm just making a quick sketch of what one might look like, right? This is my variable, whatever it is that's changing, points scored or rain, how many rain inches fallen, how many shoes you have, right? And we make a box around √1 and √3, and we draw a line through all the numbers, and that's how we make a box and whisker plot, or also known as a box plot. Our last learning target is comparing those distributions, which we just got done doing. So learning target 3 is what's called comparing distributions. So if you miss points on the upcoming quiz, I guess it wouldn't be upcoming anymore, it's because you didn't get all your points on the rubric. You have to follow all these and make sure you talk about the context and make sure you use comparative words, not just listing things out. Each one should be touched on. If it's not happening, you just say, yeah, it's not there. So this is your shape. And again, that's usually words like symmetrical or roughly symmetrical. We use words like skewed or bimodal, unimodal. Here, outliers. If I can calculate it, I address that. And I want to use the 1.5 IQR rule. All right, my measures of center, we've really been focusing on mean and median, right? We use the mean when the data is symmetrical and the median when it is not symmetrical. And we dug quite a bit deeper on what we call variability. How spread out is the data? We can find out its spread outedness either from the standard deviation, which we use when the mean is used and when our data is symmetrical. The IQR, the interquartile range, we use when it's skewed or have outliers, so we stick with the median and the IQR. Or we can always use the range. Even though it's not very telling, we can use the range. All right, nice work, guys. That is the lesson.